Regulation's here to stay. The data challenges that are going to be thrown at us are only going to get worse. So let's take a strategic approach.
Welcome back to the Bankers Masterclass series entitled Data Deluge, Asset or Liability, in association with Gresham Technologies. I'm Joy Macknight, Deputy and Technology Editor at The Banker, and I'm joined by Ian Manocha, CEO of Gresham, which specializes in providing real-time transaction control. In Chapter 2 of this 4-part video series, we'll discuss how banks can better cope with regulatory and compliance challenges. Ian, thanks so much for joining us today. How is the regulatory and compliance environment really driving up costs for banks, but also reducing their profit margins?
Well, you're right, it certainly is. Recent surveys that I saw indicate that as a percentage of revenue spent on compliance-related matters, banks are heading into an environment by 2020 of spending nearly double-digit. So the percentage of budgets and of course the percentage of management time, so there's an opportunity cost here. And I think one of the single biggest things we need to look at is how we can tackle multiple potentially overlapping regulations, cross-cutting in terms of the data requirements, and how we can tackle that in a different way, not by individual regulation. Let's call it taking a platform approach to how we resolve the systems problems.
Okay, and can you give me some concrete examples with some of the customers that you're working with?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, let's just take a simple example of some of the regulations around risk and finance data. BCBS 239 has significant responsibilities in terms of how organisations pull together their risk and finance related data. And on the other hand, of course, you've got MiFID II. There's data overlap there, there's systems overlap, there's process overlap. So it's really important in that simple example that what we don't do is replicate or duplicate efforts. So we have clients that have looked at problems like that and said, it doesn't matter whether I have a regulatory problem that's global or local or by asset class or whatever, but let's have one platform that validates all of our regulatory reporting, no matter what other tools we're using to actually provide the reporting and submission.
Because of course, just as you touched on there, the reporting sort of requirements are very onerous. So how can banks really better cope with that?
The reporting requirements themselves are very onerous. And of course, in addition to that, you have responsibility then to make sure that what you have reported is correct. And actually the fines are as much about that as they are about the content of the report. So in terms of responsibility on banks, you've got two pieces of cost going on here. One is, how do I get the report out the door? And then secondly, how do I make sure that what I'm sending out is accurate? And then of course, how do I, moving forward, modernise my whole environment such that when the next piece of legislation comes along, I'm not doing another project, but I'm actually operating in a much more agile and flexible way. And I do think that's where the real opportunity cost comes from, or the opportunity comes from.
But how do you think that banks can really cut the costs that they're spending now in compliance?
Well, I think what we've tended to do is we rely upon the software stacks, the technology processes, the teams of people, the partners in our ecosystem to do things the way that we have confidence in and are low risk, not necessarily low cost. Because it's a regulatory driver, we need to get things done. We're in crisis mode to hit a deadline. And we repeat that, and we repeat it, and we repeat it. And we have this overlapping cost. And what we have to do is change the paradigm here. So I think where we need to be heading in as an industry is saying, what's my control framework across all of my regulatory reporting? How do I put in place that layer across all of those regulations that can stay in place and be consistent no matter how the regulations change? And if a new one comes along, we'll take the same approach. We won't have another IT project and another IT project. So it means moving to a next generation of solution to this problem that requires investment. But I think more importantly, it requires a change of mindset to say that regulation's here to stay. The data challenges that are going to be thrown at us are only going to get worse. So let's take a strategic approach. Let's take a platform approach.
In Chapter 3, I'll be asking Ian about how banks can cope with the explosive growth in data that we are seeing today.